Welcome to the Rum Revival. My name's Arminder, and today we're talking about the first release in Mount Gay's newest annual series. This is their single estate series, Release 1. Now this is kind of a buzzworthy release because of the efforts Mount Gay undertook to create a single estate offering, and because it MSRPs for $400. Now is it worth it? Well, you'll have to stick around and find out, or just skip to the end. In a way, this rum is like a throwback to older times, the early days of Caribbean rum making when all rums were single estate rums, meaning an estate would make their rum using their own molasses made from their own sugarcane. Nowadays, that's not a common thing. Most distilleries in the Caribbean aren't making their own molasses and instead have to source it from a local sugar factory and/or in a lot of cases import it from another country. So why did Mount Gay decide to create their own molasses to make rum? Now there are a number of different issues with sourcing molasses. The demand has gone up, so it's tougher to get, it costs more, and then on top of all that, the molasses that is available isn't necessarily always good quality molasses. In some cases, it doesn't have high enough sugar content for fermentation to take place, and that's not good. So then distilleries have to bump up the sugar content by adding cane syrup or richer molasses, further increasing costs. Now, given all those issues, some distilleries are realizing that they kind of need to do something about it if they want to be around in the long term or be able to make product of a certain quality. Now, Mount Gay has decided to get back in the game of making their own molasses, or at least some of it. But to do that, they need land that they no longer have in order to make their own sugarcane. So in 2014, they purchased over 300 acres of land surrounding the distillery. The following year, they planted sugarcane, and then in 2016, they harvested 65 acres, and then in 2017, they harvested over 100 acres. So then Mount Gay worked with a local sugar factory to, instead of making the standard lower grade C molasses or blackstrap molasses out of their sugarcane, they instead produced a grade A quality molasses with it. This is essentially the least processed and heated down molasses. Less sugar crystals are formed and removed, and you end up with a very high sugar content of around 72%, and that's compared to the 30 or 40% of C-grade molasses. Now, the amount of sugarcane grown and the molasses produced is not enough for all of Mount Gay's production. They just make too much rum for that. Now, given all that, this smaller quantity of grade A molasses is used solely for this new annual series. So let's get into the specifics of this rum. So this is a blend of rums from those two initial harvests, 2016 and 2017. Fermentation of the molasses lasted 9 days with a cultivated yeast strain from the estate. Now, 9 days is pretty long by Mount Gay standards. Their typical fermentation is just around 4 days. In that span of 9 days, a secondary fermentation takes place, creating additional congeners and esters, essentially more flavor compounds. Then distillation takes place on Mount Gay's double retort pot stills. Each vintage was then aged in ex-bourbon American oak casks. The 2016 vintage was aged for 6 years and the 2017 for 5 years. Those two vintages are then blended together and then bottled at 55% ABV. So, if we're using the youngest rum in here, this is essentially a 5-year-old rum. A total of 4,002 bottles were produced with about 1,200 for the US. And that's the rum and its backstory in a nutshell. A fairly large nutshell, but there you go. So let's finally get around to tasting it. So that first initial hit I get when I put my nose into the glass there is a hit of flambéed bananas. Now I've found over time as I've smelt this that banana kind of recedes. I don't really pick that up anymore. And this kind of, once it opens up, I get a lot of flowers. Like, it's very floral. It kind of evokes like chrysanthemums or like chrysanthemum tea. Now eventually, after a couple of minutes when it kind of opens up, then I pick up honey. It's a floral honey, but it's also very like vibrant. And intermingled with that, I'm getting a little bit of vanilla and pear. Let's give it a taste. Honestly, the first thing you notice is how light and bright it is. Almost like crisp. And there's like this initial burst of lemon. Yeah, that lemon still kind of there. Once you've had a couple more sips and you've spent some time with it, now I'm locked onto this very unique honey kind of note. Like with the nose, it's a floral honey. When I say honey, I'm not meaning that this is like an overly sweetened rum at all. No, I'm just talking about that quality of honey that is often kind of, I don't know, kind of earthy. That honey is coming on your palate with a mix of like acidity, a touch, maybe a touch of menthol, like the lightest touch, but it also veers into this note of like spiced pear. Now, like rapid fire, I'm getting a couple of notes of like sea salt and pepper, a little bit of like green pepper actually, and even like a touch of pineapple. Now, the more time I spend with this, the more though that I really lock on to that honey note. Now, is that honey the grade A molasses shining through? I have no idea. Now, this is worth mentioning. This is surprisingly light on the palate. Like you often expect 100% pot still rums that are over 100 proof to have this like touch of intensity and presence, like from start to finish, to maybe have like some oiliness and some body. This doesn't really do that. This rum is like all kind of up front and all the way maybe to like midway on the palate. After it kind of crests the midway point on your palate, it really kind of pulls back and plays a little coy, like it becomes delicate and soft and gentle. That finish has a little bit of like a cleaning supply note that kind of veers into the notes of a lychee. So that like second half lightness and the lightness of the finish was not what I was expecting when I first tried this. It was a bit surprising, even a little disappointing. You know, I was expecting that oiliness and that robustness, but I think expectations are one thing, but you kind of have to meet the rum on what it's actually doing. So I think a fair warning for other people going into this rum, I think if you expect it to be that big kind of pot still, kind of heavy kind of rum, that's not what it's gonna be. But if you go in with the knowledge that's not gonna be that and that understanding, then I think you'll have a better first impression. So since that first time I drank this, I've spent a couple of different drinking sessions with this, and I've come to appreciate this rum for what it is. You know, I really like that floral honey note that feels lively and bright on the palate, and I kind of dig that, you know, like it's energetic, if you will. And then there's the question of terroir, right? Folks like to say that cane juice rums are terroir-driven agricultural products, and that rums made from molasses aren't, because molasses is a byproduct of sugarcane and heavily processed. And when you source molasses, it's coming from all over the place, so it doesn't really have a connection to where you're making that rum. But what about in this scenario where the molasses comes from Mount Gay, from their fields, and it's as lightly processed as you can get? Is this then an agricultural product? Does it have terroir? I don't know, but maybe this is as close to it as you can get with molasses. I will say that what I'm tasting here is definitely different than what I'm used to with Mount Gay's offering, so something's going on. So that's how I feel about the rum. Now, here's the thing. Nothing really exists in a vacuum, so I think it's fair to consider the cost, right? And as I mentioned earlier, it MSRPs for $400, but I've seen it as high as $550. And sure, 5 years of aging for $400 might seem like weird math. That being said, I am of the opinion that the cost and perceived value and perceived quality of a spirit shouldn't just be like a one-to-one association with how long it's aged. Now, given the upfront cost of buying land and building a whole infrastructure around growing and harvesting cane and creating molasses out of it, this was like never gonna be like $100 bottle. And that's just the economics of it. And clearly this is Mount Gay trying to put out a high-end premium product while at the same time making a play for having more control over the molasses that they use. So flat out, would I spend $400 again on this particular rum? No, I wouldn't. I don't think it's worth the price tag. That's not implying it's not a good rum or that I didn't like it. I think it's good to very good, but I don't think any rum is really worth that price tag when you can get world-class rums around and even under $100. To me, anything in that like $200 or more range becomes more about rarity, collectability, or some other kind of like unique experience. In this case, I guess that unique experience would be the farm to glass nature of it all. Now, I am looking forward to seeing how the series grows and evolves over the years. Definitely interested in seeing an older release in the series, but I'm more interested in trying the releases where the molasses is actually made by Mount Gay at their brand new sugar mill that they opened up in 2022. I imagine we're probably like a few years and a few releases away from that. And unless there's some sort of release where it's aged or finished in some kind of interesting, unique barrel like a Calvados or a Charonda or something like that, outside of that, I'm probably not going to be buying another one anytime soon. Well, there you go. That's the first release in the new Mount Gay Single Estate series. Have you tried it? What are your thoughts? Can you taste the quality of the molasses? Do you think it's worth $400? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. Thanks so much for watching. Catch you next time. Cheers.